Welcome back, everybody, to another reaction video. And today we're going to be taking a look at Sabaton history. We haven't done that for a little while. And I realized in going back over the Sabaton songs that I've reviewed over time that we never looked at the two-part Sabaton history for Uprising. Now, Uprising is the song, fantastic song about the Warsaw Uprising of 1944, when the people of Poland, particularly in Warsaw, rose up against the Nazi occupiers as the Red Army was closing in on that part of Poland. It's simultaneously both an incredibly inspiring story, but also an incredibly frustrating and sad story because the people didn't receive the help that they should have received from the Allies, and there's a lot of reasons for that I'm sure we're going to get into during this video. A couple things before we get started. A lot of you ask about these things, so I'm just going to give them to you as reminders. There are links in the description to a number of things, including my Instagram account, so whenever I'm traveling to historic sites, I'll post pictures on Instagram, and sometimes personal things too, but usually that. Also, there's a link to my gaming channel, which is called History Guy Gaming. Many of you already follow that, but I've had that channel for about 4.5 years, and I try to post daily content there as well, but it doesn't always happen depending on what's going on. This channel has become my priority. There's also a link to our Discord, and there's always a lot of activity there, so join us on those things. Let's dive in to Sabaton history, Uprising.
There are times when the struggle is so monumental that you know you will not win, you know you will not survive, and you know you will not even make great change, and yet you still make that fight.
And our song Uprising is about that.
And that's why I love you, Poland, because everything he just said is absolutely true. This was a fight where they knew they were probably fighting a losing battle. They knew it probably wouldn't even make that much of a difference, but they did it anyway because it was the right thing to do, and because that's who the Polish people are. They are fighters. They are people who don't give up. They are people who fight for the right thing, fight against those that have oppressed them, and I have all the respect in the world for you, Poland.
This is Sabaton History, and I'm Spartacus also. I'm sitting in for Indy today because the current pandemic has left many of us stuck in different places over the past months and thrown our recording schedule around a bit. But I'm also the host and lead writer of the subseries War Against Humanity on our World War II channel, where I cover resistance, partisan warfare, war crimes, and crimes against humanity during the Second World War, which are also the topics of Sabaton's song Uprising. Okay, so it's July 1944. The Eastern Front is in motion. German Army Group Center has collapsed in the face of repeated offensives by the Soviet First Belarusian Front, now striking deep into Poland. It is widely expected that capturing Warsaw will be the next thing on the list of the Red Army objectives. With the end of the German occupation literally on the horizon, the leaders of the Polish underground resistance, the Armia Krajowa, or Home Army, meet for a secret meeting. After nearly 5 years of occupation, humiliation, and suffering, the resistance of Warsaw is eager to rise up.
And so you got to remember that Warsaw has been just hell on earth. It's been turned into this ghetto where the people who haven't been hauled away to slave labor camps or to death camps have been basically walled in and stuck there during this entire 5 years of occupation. It's a horrible, horrible place. And the fact that they had the energy or the ability to mount any kind of an uprising at all is a small miracle in and of itself, and it's a testimony to the strength and the fortitude of the Polish people. And the very least they should have expected was help from the Americans, the British, the Russians. And whether they were unable or unwilling, they didn't get it.
Radio calls are made to the exiled Polish government in London, who in turn appeal to the British and American authorities for help. The time has come. The Poles will now fight to take back their capital. However, the Western Allies are hesitant to promise help outright. They welcome resistance against the Germans, sure, but they do have logistical problems with the fight in France and Italy in full swing at the same time. But mostly, This is the Soviet theater of war, and they don't want to step on any toes, so the Poles will have to rely on Soviet cooperation first and foremost.
Unfortunately, the reality at this point in the war is, I think, by and large, by mid to late 1944, I think the Allies understand that they are headed toward victory. The only question is, how long is it going to take? How many lives are we going to lose in the process? And then, of course, there's the question of, what does Europe look like after the war? And that's kind of the balancing act that's going on here. It was certainly a motivation in landing in Normandy when we did, because I think the Soviets probably were going to make it to Berlin and defeat Germany with or without a landing at Normandy. Just would have taken longer. But Churchill, Roosevelt, others, they understand at this point that they do not want a Europe dominated by the Soviet Union in the post-war world. And so that's a part of all of this. You've got the Western Front opened up. You've got the invasion moving up the Italian peninsula. You've got the Russians coming in from the east, and you've got all the political considerations that go with that. And that's also what the Soviets are thinking. They're thinking about what Poland is going to look like after the war. And I think that's a big motivation and why they don't do more to help. They certainly want the uprising to disrupt things for the Nazis, but they also don't want that same uprising to come at them in the post-war world.
However, the position of the Home Army towards the Soviet Union is one of uncertainty and mistrust, as memories of the pact between Hitler and Stalin that had swallowed and divided Poland are still pretty fresh.
Yeah, remember, the Soviets invaded Poland in 1939. They basically came in from both sides and split the country. And the reason that we, if you're wondering why did we declare, or why did the Allies declare war on Germany but not on the Soviet Union? Well, the defensive pact they had with Poland was specific to Germany, and if Germany did something, it had nothing to say about what happened if the Soviets did something.
If the Poles do nothing, then the Red Army will overrun Poland and the government in exile will be powerless in the newly communist Poland. But if the rising is successful, then Warsaw will be in the hand of democratic Poles. Then they hope that the autocratic Soviet Union can't simply impose its will on Poland, so the Poles have everything to win and everything to lose. However, the Germans still have strong forces in the region. If the resistance rises up before the Wehrmacht there can be wholly engaged with the Red Army, the Germans would most certainly crush them. So the Polish Home Army has to wait for the last possible moment when the Red Army is on the outskirts of Warsaw. Then, with logistical help from the West and cooperation from the Red Army, the insurgents could drive the Germans out of the city. At least one of those two last things has to happen, or the rising is doomed. Back in February, the resistance fighters outside of Warsaw had made contact with Soviet Marshal Rokossovsky's spearheads. Rokossovsky agreed to principal tactical cooperation, but refrained from promising anything beyond that. And when the Home Army then begins revealing itself to the Soviets, they are greeted with unexpectedly hostile behavior. The available reports of the NKVD, the Soviet Interior Ministry and Secret Police, paint a clearer picture of the situation. They call the Polish Home Army illegal formations, rebels, and bandits. They are white Poles allied to Great Britain and are an old enemy.
So this is just a reminder that while the British, the French, the Americans, the Western allies, as we call them, are allies with the Soviets, it's really like there's three separate factions here. There's the Axis, there's the Western Allies, there's the Soviets. The Soviets got their own set of priorities, and it's really more of a situation where they're not really allies. It's like the enemy of my enemy is my friend kind of thing. And you can see here, I mean, the Soviets are hostile to the Polish uprising because they're already thinking about what they're going to do with Poland after the war. So they're not going to do anything to set Poland up to be in a place to resist their occupation after the war. It's just really, they're not trying to free Poland, they're just trying to take Poland from the Nazis.
See, although they currently fight the same enemy, Polish nationalism is contradictory to Stalin's plan. And of course, it's only been a bit more than 20 years since the Poles won the Polish-Soviet War, And one of the people really responsible for the loss of the Battle of Warsaw back then was Joseph Stalin. The NKVD makes it clear that they will not allow any irregular or partisan actions in the rear of their armies. Soon, any Polish resistance fighters caught behind the front line is arrested, disarmed, and removed. By July, more than 30,000 Home Army fighters have been interned by the Red Army. Inside Warsaw, the Home Army is caught between the desire for action and the need for caution. The atmosphere in the city is tense, and Pole and German alike feel that something is about to go down. By August, the Soviet front draws close, and while the Wehrmacht prepares to halt Soviet attacks across the Vistula, the Home Army decides to risk everything.
And so remember, this is August 1944 now, so now we're talking about the Normandy invasion has been successful. The Allies in the West are starting to push inland. The writing is starting to be on the wall for the Germans, both in the east and the west. The southern front is collapsing. Italy's out of the war, and so now the Germans have to defend Italy as well.
On the night of August 1st, groups of armed young men break curfew and gather throughout the city. At 0500, they strike. German trucks are bombed and German patrols gunned down. They storm the railway office, the post office, and the major power station. Most importantly, they capture storehouses, taking German helmets and weapons, camouflage jackets, and even SS uniforms. To distinguish themselves from their enemy, they wear their white and red armbands or eagle insignias. Around 2,500 insurgents fall the first day, and many civilians are caught in the crossfire. But although they are not able to make the police district or the airport, the day is considered a success. They have been able to free many Jews from the SS concentration camp known as Goose Farm, and even managed to capture a tank. Large parts of the city are now under their control, so they must continue the fight until help arrives.
Good for them.
They inform London by radio that the fight for Warsaw has begun. On the night of the 4th, the first British bombers are spotted over the skies of Warsaw. The Poles rejoice as crates filled with weapons and supplies are parachuted in. They have not been forgotten by their allies. The Germans, however, are now reacting as well. Anti-insurgency specialist SS Obergruppenführer Erich von dem Bach arrives in Warsaw. He reports back to SS Commander Heinrich Himmler the real scale of the rising, and Himmler flies into a violent rage. He orders von dem Bach to not only crush the insurgency, but to obliterate Warsaw. The home of Polish history and culture is to be liquidated once and for all.
So, it's always been interesting to me, and I'm sure there are reasons for this. I'm not fully versed on what was going on in Warsaw during the ghetto and everything like that. I never fully understood why the Germans didn't do that in the first place. I'm glad they didn't do that in the first place. But it's interesting that it took this long for them to just say, forget it, obliterate the city. It's basically one of those things, if we can't have it, nobody can, type of thing.
Is to be liquidated once and for all. The Wehrmacht, however, have their hands full fighting the Red Army, so Himmler orders his own SS troops to Warsaw. What arrives at that city is an assortment of some of the most notoriously undisciplined, criminal, and murderous SS units the Nazis have to offer. The SS Brigade Dielewanga, the Russian SS Rona Brigade, Cossack and Azerbaijani auxiliary regiments, several Einsatzgruppen and military police units.
And the Einsatzgruppen are the units that you see in the early stages of the invasion, rounding up entire villages and executing them. These are the death squads. That famous picture that I think was taken in Ukraine of the woman with her small child, with the guy standing there with the gun about to shoot. That's Einsatzgruppen. That's who these guys are. They're basically sending in the worst of the worst. These are the people you send in when you want mass extermination of civilians, and that's what ends up happening. I think the number was somewhere like 150,000 to 200,000 civilians died, and these aren't just the uprising. The actual underground was like 10 or 15,000 were killed, but this became really, really ugly, really fast.
And for a few days, these units take Himmler's orders literally. Fighting the insurgency almost becomes a secondary objective as they kill every man woman and child in sight, and systematically set their homes on fire. Tens of thousands of people are slaughtered. It becomes so bad, with so many reports of rapes and looting, that von den Bach has officers shot to try and rein in the men. He has to issue orders to not summarily shoot women and children anymore. The city becomes an urban battlefield. Loudspeakers urge the insurgents to give up before they are all killed. The Luftwaffe and German artillery bomb the rebel districts, but the insurgents prove resilient. They hide in Warsaw's deep cellars and use the destroyed buildings to entrap the enemy. They lure them into killing zones where snipers and grenadiers await them. The ruined city denies the SS their numerical advantage, and after 2 weeks of fighting, neither side has that advantage. The Poles fight from the street barricades and fortified cellars connected by trenches and sewers. Women and children work tirelessly in underground kitchens, hospitals, and makeshift workshops. Days turn to weeks. By the end of August, though, even as the spirit of the insurgency is still high, the outside world is eerily quiet.
And you have to figure that by this point they thought somebody would have come. The Red Army would have arrived in Warsaw to their relief. But I think the Red Army actually parks outside the city and waits intentionally for this thing to die down before they go in. It's just frustratingly cruel what happens.
Even contemporary German sources expect the Soviets to try to link up with the insurgents as quickly as possible. The Red Army advances towards the Baltics and the Balkans, but not on the Vistula. Winston Churchill is among the first to make the assumption that this pause during the most critical moment of the Rising, where any Soviet attack might have tipped the scale, is deliberate.
Yeah.
Rokossovsky stands just 20 kilometers away from Warsaw. How come, since the end of July, not one Soviet aircraft has been seen flying over Warsaw? No drop has been made, no shelling of German positions. Did Stalin condemn the Rising to its fate? For historians, it's impossible to know Stalin's exact inner motives. Many of the records regarding Poland are still sealed tightly in Russian archives. Reliable intelligence was certainly scarce, and the reports from the NKVD portray the insurgency as a reckless adventure by a gang of criminals and bandits. Polish nationalism has no place in Stalin's great strategy. The British will cancel their airlifts as well because of the inefficiency of sending planes from Italian air bases 1,300 kilometers away. There are actually over 200 U.S. Air Force planes stationed in Poltava, but Stalin denies them airspace over Poland. Inside Warsaw, losses are heavy on both sides. The Germans have been forced to reinforce the SS with crack units like the Hermann Göring Panzerdivision, and slowly but surely the insurgents are pushed back into the city center.
Absolutely abandoned by the people that should have been there to help them. You can't entirely blame the British for ceasing efforts to drop supplies to them, realizing that without the support of the Soviet Red Army, without being able to get closer air bases to do this, that it was inefficient, and unfortunately those resources could be better used somewhere else to win the war. Oh, it's so frustrating, and I feel just that helpless feeling that the Polish people must have had, knowing that once again, just like in 1939, they are completely on their own. It's cruel. It's awful. I don't have enough superlatives for it.
Fighting continues unabated in the cemeteries, the suburbs, and the former ghetto. But by September, the situation grows desperate. They have held out far longer than expected, but they cannot win a battle of attrition. Down to a quarter of their fighting strength, and with food and medical supplies dwindling, negotiations for surrender begin. But just then, in mid-September, the Soviets suddenly attack the eastern outskirts of Warsaw. It is General Berling's army, made up of Polish communists and collaborators, who attack the German garrisons. Soviet planes now drop supplies, and Soviet artillery shells the city. All surrender negotiations are broken off, and the Polish spirits rise. Volunteers swim the Vistula to greet their allies. But they never return. Reports soon reach the Home Army that those volunteers are arrested and interrogated about their holdouts and their officers, and some are even tortured and shot. Berling's attempt is not the long-awaited Soviet offensive. Rokossovsky does not move, and the insurgency is doomed. On September 18th, a large fleet of flying fortresses make one last supply run. But it is too late. Nearly all of the crates parachute into German territory as the insurgents are by now pressed into a small area in the city center.
This is late September, almost October. These people held out for several months. I'd just be repeating myself to just continue to express my frustration about how this went down.
Left with only a handful of blocks and streets, the Home Army has no real choice. They can either surrender to the Nazis, who will probably murder them, or try to escape to the Soviets, who will likely turn on them as well. The final shot of the uprising is fired on October 2nd. It has lasted 63 days.
63
Civilians
days.
and insurgents alike are arrested and sent to concentration camps. The ruins of the western part of the city are now once again occupied by the Germans. In the east, just across the river, the Soviets stand and watch. Poland, once again, is divided between the Germans and the Soviets, but not forever, for the old words ring true. Jeszcze Polska nie zginęła, póki nie śpiemy. Poland is not yet lost, as long as we live.
You know, we've talked about a lot of stuff from different songs of yours that have to do with the Second World War, because you have a bunch of them and stuff. And you've met people and relatives, like Audie Murphy's relatives and stuff, and Helen Back and stuff. Did you guys ever meet anybody that actually had anything to do with the uprising itself?
Yeah, several actually. I remember the first couple of people we met. Obviously, we're talking about people who are really old, quite possibly dead now. This was back in 2010. A lot got lost in translation. It was an emotional experience, but it was really hard because, you know, speaking through a translator at a museum, we were at the Warsaw Uprising Museum, but a few days later, we were still in Poland then, we heard of a woman who had fought in the uprising. Her name was Anna.
Wow.
And she had moved to Sweden, actually, after everything happened there.
At the end of the war?
At the end of the war. But it was really one of those moments that I will never forget in my life, because we were speaking Swedish. Yeah. Old people in Poland, for obvious reasons, aren't very good at English.
They're not very good at Swedish in general.
Yeah, but she lived in Sweden from, I guess, somewhere in the 40s until 2006, I think it was, or 2009.
Back.
So she just recently moved back when her husband died, I think it was.
Okay.
And speaking with her and her experiences, and it is so far away from the action movies and everything. I mean, her main role in the uprising, being a young woman, or a young girl maybe, wasn't, you know, frontline combat. Right. But of course, she had to. They captured a tank, a German tank. I can't remember if it was a Leopard or something. They actually captured it.
Very cool.
Yeah. And the story she would tell, it is nothing like the movies. Her stories of, delivering messages through the sewers and how cramped and tiny it was. Oh. I have no idea how it was, but at the Warsaw Uprising Museum in Warsaw, they have sort of reconstructed those sewers so you can walk through them. Oh, boy. And they start out pretty big, then they get pretty small, and you can, you know, try and, you know, how they would move.
See how you could get, how far you could do it.
Oh man, if you're even slightly claustrophobic, you're fucked. Yeah. Her tale how such an obviously extreme circumstances, living under those circumstances, and still life goes on.
That's, you know, I'm glad that you put that out here, that it's not that the Warsaw Uprising or any war or any combat that you sing about and that we talk about is not what it looks like in the movies. I think people misunderstand that. And I think people lose track of that this is the stuff we talk about on this channel and the stuff that they sing about. It's very interesting, and it's important to remember these things for a variety of reasons, but it's not cool. Yeah. It's not what you see in the movies. The movies, they want you to watch the story, great, but they also have to give you
entertainment
value. And war is not entertainment value. It's not cool.
No, it's so much boredom. I mean, how fun would it be a movie about World War One? Somebody getting sick in a trench, going back to a hospital, going back to the trench, taking one step up, dead.
And that's your video game, and that's 3 weeks you've been playing the game, and that's your first time over. Well, I mean, think of even some people we've covered, like Simo Hey, right? I mean, he would spend days iced in with ice to make a... There's nothing exciting or romantic about that. It is specifically mechanical.
So, totally agree with everything they just said there. Those of us who have not lived through it really don't understand what this stuff was like. We can read about it, we can see movies about it, but we really will never get it. And that's why it's so important for us when we have people who have lived through these things to listen to them, to talk to them, to gain all the knowledge that we can from them while we have them and not take them for granted. We have so very, very few World War II veterans left around the world. And if you are lucky enough to have one of those people in your life, talk to them, record it. Find out, and I understand a lot of them aren't willing to talk about it, and that's fine. I completely understand why that would be the case, but some will. And the Warsaw Uprising is one of those things. The fact that anybody survived it at all, to be able to talk about it afterwards, is a small miracle. But again, I've said it a million times. I'll say it one more time. Poland, we love you, and I have the utmost respect for your spirit, for your nation, and for all of the times that you have shown who you are. And this was one of those times. So I think they're pretty much just kind of doing some chit chat here at the end. So I'm going to wrap it up right here. There is a part 2 to this, and we'll do it in a few days. But let me know your thoughts about all that. Use the comment section below. I'll put a link in the description to the original video so you can check it out. And we'll see you again soon. Thanks for watching.